So we have to do the discussions on AM Talk, and today we said that we're talking mining, and basically the issues surrounding the sector as far as regulation, the current difficulties the sector is facing, the concerns not only from those workers in the mining companies who perhaps are afraid they could be affected by the current retrenchment and downsizing and cost-cutting being undertaken by the various mining companies as a result of what's happening basically to gold prices on the international market. It's a great subject to talk about. We have in the studio the Chief Executive of Ghana's Minerals Commission, and Dr. Tony Obing, who has been in the industry for quite a number of years now. It's a privilege to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
If you get to read a lot of current literature, we're told that mining contributes 5% to the current country's GDP. Is that the case?
That's correct.
And gold significantly at over 35% of what we get from mining.
Yes. In fact, gold is about 90%.
90%?
90%. Between 90 and 95, actually.
That's significant.
Very
really
significant.
And now, as far as the difficulties that the sector is facing, is it only because these are external pressures as a result of the volatility of the prices, especially of gold on the commodities market?
Thanks, Roland. I think you hit the nail right on the head. Ghana has been dependent on mining, particularly gold, for a very long time. And when you are dependent on a particular commodity, you tend to be, vulnerable to the vicissitudes of that particular commodity, particularly in terms of price. And since we are just price takers, because we don't determine what price we sell our gold, just as we don't even determine what price we sell our cocoa, when the behavior of the cocoa of gold price or mineral prices is not good, you get the effect. And that is exactly what is happening. But also when the gold price is good, you also get the benefit. So I think yes, Ghana is being hit hard because of our dependence over the years on cocoa and other mineral and gold. And that's why we are really suffering now.
And currently, the companies reeling under this very pressure have been forced to take some downsizing and cost-cutting measures. Workers are the most sufferers, the workers of those mining companies. How are you dealing with that as a commission? Yeah,
that's a very difficult thing. I always say, and sometimes people don't understand me, I say that the issue, the challenge being faced by the mining industry, it's not so much the gold price. I know it's very controversial because we have seen gold price of around 250. Even when I started, when I entered into the mining industry, gold price was about $300, $250 an ounce. Today, it is around 1,300. So if you see the gap, you think that gold price has risen so much. Now, obviously, if you go as far as to 2012 or 2013, I guess 2012, gold price was in the range of 1,800. And now, within a short time, it came down to 1,200, 1,100. So that's why people are complaining. The key challenge, as I see, is rather the cost of mining. What goes into mining?
It has become more expensive.
Exactly. Okay. And that actually determines the margin, how profitable you are doing the business. Because you see, business people, and if you ask the businessmen and women, they will tell you, they don't do business for price. They do business for profit. So if the price is very high and the cost is very high, you don't have a margin. So you can talk about price being high, but the margin being low. So mostly there's a cost that I believe the mining companies are crying about. But the cost often is also not determined largely by Ghana. You see, Ghana has its own role to play. But if you talk about, for instance, the price of cyanide, Ghana doesn't produce cyanide. So if cyanide price keeps going up, then obviously the price is being imported.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And all these have influences on the cost of operations.
Most of the things that we use, we import them. And therefore, when the price goes up, we import the price as well.
Those are even the relativities. But how has the energy crisis we've experienced over the last couple of years, so to speak, maybe perhaps the last 2-3 years, contributed significantly to the current measures being undertaken by the mining companies?
Yeah, well, energy is an issue, and I know VRA and other sectors that deal with energy production and distribution are talking to the mining companies to see what can be done, and government is also looking at it very actively. Now, that it is true that over the years, all of us have experienced high energy costs. And the mining company being a major consumer of energy, and obviously because of the way our system is, very few people pay the real price of energy. Unfortunately for businesses, particularly mining, the idea is to expose them to the right price, which is higher than what other people pay. So it is more exposing them to the naked price, so that you don't really like feel subsidized, you know. So I think that has been a major issue, because when I was in the 90s, I think Ghana used to be one of the cheapest source of energy in Africa. And so people came...
As far as the production is concerned.
Production, yeah, because we're using largely the Akosombo. So really, the cost of producing power was not that much. So I think it reflected in the price they sold to consumers. Now, I believe as the mix it changed, you know, we have the thermal plus the hydro. So, and obviously, producing power with thermal is more expensive than just using the water to sort of turn the turbines. So this actually increased the price, and we all felt it. It's not today, it's been over the years. And unfortunately, or maybe, well, exposing them to the real price, it is more the mining companies that have to handle that.
Well, we're going to have in the studio the Chief Executive of the Ghana Chamber of Mines, and SULEMAN is around the studio. We'll be inviting him into the discussions, but he's been having a lot of discussions on the subject, and that also has been the premise on which we decided to do this very discussion or briefing on what the challenges are in the mining industry, and what needs to be done to make sure that the various players also tend to have a better perspective as to what is the way forward. And then those who are the likely beneficiaries, not only the country Ghana, but also the workers and the communities involved, also tend to have a head start into what really the appreciation of the difficulties of the mining companies should be. And we'll play this very piece. SULEMAN will be in the studio joining us. Then we'll have a very comprehensive discussion for the mining industry. Do stay on. We'll be right back.
There's been downturns in some mines, okay? But if you look at it on an aggregate, on a whole, we are not doing too badly, because if you compare this year's half-year production to that of last year, production is about 1% up, which is about flat. But the downside is that because of the price of gold, the revenue impact has been adverse. So you have a decline in revenue of about 14%, although the production has actually gone up by about 1%. As you well know, the royalty is based upon gross revenue. So if gross revenue is actually hit, so to speak, then naturally it would affect, you know, the amount of royalty that government gets. But again, the highest, you know, benefit, that fiscal benefit that government gets from the mining industry is not royalty. It is more corporate tax. It's more corporate tax, and therefore, although royalty will be impacted, again, corporate tax in all likelihood would also be impacted, because that is also dependent upon the revenue that mining companies make.
So the acting chief executive of the Ghana Chamber of Mines has joined us, and SULEMAN or is SULEMAN, eh? Okay. My preference for SULEMAN is also because I have a lot of friends from Senegal and Mali, so you have to pardon me. And now we're just having a discussion on the current steps being taken by the mining companies and are taking a lot of retrenchment. And for you representing the mining companies, that's a good thing for you. At least you're cutting down on costs, and as far as your operations are concerned, it makes your books very well balanced, even though workers are the most sufferers.
No, exactly. Thank you very much for the question. But generally, the mining companies have done pretty well regarding cutting down their costs. But there's a limit to how far they can go without really impacting, the generality of the business. And there are other areas where we believe that government itself should also come in. Areas of concern, particularly, for example, the cost of diesel to the mines and then the cost of power. We believe that the cost of these two key inputs have to be looked at again, because these costs are really, really high. And from our numbers we actually crunch, the mining companies are actually paying a premium, particularly on diesel. Power, for those in the regulated market, there's a huge premium there as well. Fortunately for the mining industry, there's a leeway for the unregulated market, where a chunk of the mining companies are, and they therefore have the opportunity to sit with the providers of the power, the generators of power, to negotiate, these tariffs. But generally, some of the inputs are determined. The cost of these inputs are determined by government, and that is where we believe that government needs to take a second look at the cost of some of these inputs. Yes.
Yeah, because we're just talking about energy when you walked in. The subject of what the debate should be, whether the energy crisis we've had over the last couple of years, perhaps 2 or 3 years, and how its impact has compelled the companies to take the decisions you're taking now, vis-a-vis what's also happening on the international commodities market.
Yeah, energy is quite critical to the mining industry, quite energy intensive, and because of the uncertainty, the supply of power over the years, for example, the mining companies, 4 of the big mining companies decided to come together to donate, what we call the MRP, the Mines Reserve Plan, to government. So is
that what generated just in 88?
About 80 megawatts.
Like
so
80
that becomes
megawatts.
a kind of fallback position for the companies whenever we are in crisis. But if you look at the aggregate demand of the mining industry, certainly more than the 80 megawatts exactly. So certainly something needs to give. And some of the companies are looking at, engaging independent power producers to produce power for them. Unfortunately for us, the challenge we have is the source of fuel for this, because if you generate through light crude oil, then it's rather expensive. So your best bet is to be looking at, say, gas. And the challenges we have with gas, West African gas pipeline, so much uncertainty there, and even the adequacy of the flow to the country. And therefore, there's always a need for us to, ensure that we have the fuel rights before we are able to come to a kind of agreement with the independent power producer. And that is what is actually holding back. But once we are assured that, as a country, that we have adequate volumes of gas through our own indigenous means, or even through what we call the LNG, the liquefied natural gas, then I'm sure that the companies would be in a position to, get together and sign what we call the PPAs, power purchase agreements with the IPPs, so that at least that would also reduce their cost of production to some extent. Yes.
There's always going to be an argument as to whether that's the way we need to go. And really, if you talk to the experts, they will talk. They also have their own minds whether the IPPs themselves also need to be producing or undertaking their business based on energy that also comes from government sources or national sources and etc. in terms of pricing and the difficulties they have. But you being the arbiter and usually trying to be the regulator, how difficult is it for you trying to shuffle in between as a commission, knowing that in reality the mining companies are facing so much, and they also need to take certain concrete steps to make sure the sustainability of the business is adequately assured?
Well, sure. I mean, I think you used the right word. You said in reality, because sometimes that's different from how we perceive things from the outside. Now, I know that government is definitely interested in ensuring that the mining industry stays in business, and therefore would not do anything to sort of cripple it or make it difficult for them to achieve their objectives. So really, that's a challenge, and I believe the biggest hope is the coming on board of the gas facility. And if it does, and as you know, the mining sector has a priority in terms of how power will be generated and distributed. You know, the Prestia, for example, has a particular area, where the gas is supposed to be used and then transmitted in the form of power for the industry. So obviously, government is very interested in ensuring that you know, the industry stays in business. As I indicated, if you have an industry that contributes in excess of, now it's gone down, but you know, a year or two ago, 28% of our internal revenue, then you would want to take care of that industry. If you have an industry that, you know, the challenges we're facing with foreign exchange, for instance, is probably the challenge of gold price going down, because now the foreign exchange is not coming as it should. And I read a Bank of Ghana report that suggested that among the sectors that export, I was surprised myself. It is the gold, the mining industry that brings in more foreign exchange, contrary to the perception that we all have when we are outside the kitchen room.
That seems to be just the normal banking
exactly, yeah. So generally, government is key, and that government want to ensure that, but they want to do so in protecting its own interest as well, because the minerals are exhaustible commodity, the exhaustible resource, and therefore you want to make sure that you maximize, somebody will say optimize your benefit before it is exhausted. And so government has like the Minerals Commission, for example, has a very tight rope to walk, ensuring that the industry operate and vibrate and benefits themselves and other stakeholders. And government wants to ensure that they also, because the minerals in their natural state belong to all of us, belong to government, want to ensure that once you exploit it, it benefits them. And you do so without destroying the environment. I think that's the key thing. So we are all worried, you know, that the challenges of cost is affecting everybody. I'm sure everybody, but that's the situation of the times, and we are hoping to see the back of it as soon as possible, if possible.
And all depend on what happens as far as the prices are concerned.
Yeah.
Now, for you, the companies, do you have enough confidence in the policies, in the steps and the measures that have been taken in providing reliable power for you, or let's say some consistent power, because basically we know that your operations will thrive effectively on reliability of power supply?
I think the policy outlook is good. What we have seen, I remember I referred to the
paper,
and I also
being
implemented, yes, and I refer to indigenous gas. Once you have indigenous gas coming on stream from a trouble, then naturally it will bridge the gap somewhat. And then long term, naturally we all know from the calculations, demand, you know, growth projections and all of that, power, gas from our indigenous sources will not be adequate, and therefore what measures would we put in place? And that's why I talk about the LNG. It may not be as cheap as gas from our own indigenous sources, but at least to assure, you know, the industry, mining industry, and every consumer of power, that we will have reliable power going forward. So yes, the policy outlook is good, and we are working intimately with government to ensure that the implementation is actually, you know, what we expect it to be, so that at least the mining industry will be assured that the power it requires to grow. Because don't forget that we have lots of mineral resources in this country, iron ore deposits and so on and so forth. We cannot exploit them optimally, to borrow Tony's word, unless we have reliable and cost-effective power to be able to actually, you know, harness these mineral resources in this country. So for power, for the mining industry, power is key, not just for the existing, you know, mines, but even future ones we hope to attract into this country.
And for you work closely with the Energy Ministry and the relevant state organizations to make sure you get it right.
That's right.
Those assurances, do they give you confidence that in trying to relating with the mining companies through the chamber or even directly, you're going to give them the best bets?
No, sure. I mean, well, government also appreciates that other sectors of Ghana, it's not only the mining industry, also require power. I mean, if manufacturing, for example, is to sustain, they will require reliable power. So I'm sure there's a very omnibus view of providing reliable power to all the sectors of the economy. However, and as I've indicated already, given the centrality of mining to our current economy, there's no doubt about that. I mean, you can stay somewhere and argue, but the fact of the matter, the figures that you see suggest that mining is still central to the economy of this country. So government obviously would want to make sure that the appropriate support is given so that the industry thrives and Ghana gains its benefit. The key word is that Ghana must benefit from the exploitation of its mineral resources. So much as it will be useful and to ensure they get the power and everything, government also want to make sure that the people get the benefit out of that.
And talking about what we need to optimize and what we also need to maximize and get out of it. We've been hearing some news more lately about how likely at the end of the fiscal period, government is likely going to have a reduction as far as what its revenues are from the mining and even the dividends, so to speak, because that all will influence all that. Is that the reality?
Yeah, it is likely to be.
In what percentage terms are we talking?
I would not be able to give you figures on that, but yes, I wouldn't, because that is not my remit. It is not within my remit, to do that. But there's no doubt about it, because when the receipt is reducing, you're producing and selling at a price lower than what you sold yesterday, what you sold 3 years ago or 2 years ago. So obviously you're not going to get the same royalties. You're not going to, and if the cost is high, the margin is low, you're not going to get the same corporate tax in quantum terms. So and I think government is aware of that. The Ministry of Finance is aware. So I think it's inculcated that into its projections. But the challenge is to try and move away from that. The challenge is to try and ensure that we also look at the other minerals that we have. And I think it's something that we haven't done in the past. There are two things. As Sule just said, the country is abound with many mineral resources, several of them, some of which can be used even locally. It's not only to produce and export. But we have focused too much on gold, manganese, and bauxite, and maybe diamonds to a certain extent. And I think it's hurting us. We have also focused on producing and exporting without having value being added.
That's a rhetoric we hear all the time.
Exactly, and that's again why I like the vision that we need to really integrate mining into the economy. If you look at the inputs, which is where the industry spends more on, the consumables. The industry spends more on consumables, and these consumables are largely imported. I mean, now it's changing. It's changing significantly. So you can imagine how much money we send out to buy these consumables, whilst if we were to produce them here and buy them here. That's how come South Africa and all these big countries are making the benefit that we all complain about that we're not getting. We need to manufacture, we need to produce what the mining industry is consuming here, so that the money is used in importing will be spent here. And you know the multiplier effect if you do those things. and you can imagine, I mean, I've seen the figures, because of my rare opportunity, I've seen the figures from the other side. So I see what we haven't done right is to try and ensure that most of the things that we need in our mining industry, bought from Ghana and not from outside. Simple.
Oh, that's as far as that's a statesman talking, because
but that's the truth.
Yeah, he has to be on the side of state as always. But you as companies are entities, and you also look at what your profit margins need to be based on what your operational costs, etc. are. If you take the current state in which we have, and his submission reminds me of back in 2005. I was a reporter then. Al Kwa came to Ghana. They signed all these MOUs and were supposed to have an integrated mining industry, and as a result of that, the port lines of Valco and even the various turbines were supposed to be ignited so that they'll start all those operations. Do we think that currently the way we have and the way we see things, there's a leeway by which companies that are operating in the industry would make maximum use of the resources they have in terms of the human resource they have, and not be so reliant on perhaps expatriate or exported human resource?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the issue of local human resources is quite key in the mining industry now, and it's highly regulated by the Minerals Commission. In fact, there's legislation which actually ensures that companies only bring in expatriates they really need. And there's a whole, endeavor to ensure that we use local expertise as much as possible. In fact, we all know that expatriates cost very, very high. The cost of expatriates is very high, and therefore many companies are minded to acknowledge and to make sure that they only bring in expatriates only when they need them to be here. And it's for a defined period, because the regulation will tell you that you should show how you are going to train Ghanaians, to take over from any expatriate that you bring up to the extent possible. So yes, mining companies are actually, conscious of the fact that there's legislation which regulates the number of expatriates you have to bring in and so on. And there's punitive sanctions if you actually flout the legislation. Yes. So as far as expatriates are concerned, I think the mining companies are wary of this, and they are complying.
Does it also apply to the other sectors of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, well, we are focused on mining, and that's an area that the sort of hue and cry has been, and the issue of ensuring that, and of course Ghana has mined for over 100 years, so sometimes you want to wonder why we still have expatriates. But we also know that the way we used to mine has changed. The kind of technology and all that have changed. So and the world is a global village now, so it is very difficult to say, we've closed our doors to expatriate, because some Ghanaians are also expatriates elsewhere, so you have to be careful. But we need to be a little selfish to ensure that the bulk of, I mean, at least even to develop ourselves, because if we don't build our capacity, how do we handle the resources that belong to us? So I think it's a good thing that we have a policy that ensures that companies bring in expatriates that they need. Only the expatriate that is cut to the bone, and that is what is needed. It is not about just bringing numbers these days. Earlier on it was the case, and the argument was that, well, we didn't have the resources, the human resource and all that. Now, Ghanaians are being exported. Ghanaians are expatriate elsewhere. So we need to be selfish, and I think that's a step in the right direction.
And if, as far as the production process is concerned, we need to have a lot more resources that could be used in the production process. How, as a commission, are you making sure that the companies also tend to find them locally?
That's a good...
because I know, for example, following the forums and the discussions you held with journalists, etc., it came out that, for example, caustic soda was something that was... we can't find it locally. Yeah. So it means that we have to export. We have to import. Import, yeah, so to speak. Now, for the companies, that comes as a huge cost.
No, sure. This for me, it is a matter of balancing the act and ensuring that caustic soda could be produced here. If it is produced elsewhere, and if the economics allow for production to be done here and be sold profitably and be bought at a price competitively, as it were, then why not? And I'll give you one example, and it's my pet example. There are two examples actually. One is the use of activated carbons. He knows my pet example. This is made out of coconut shells and then palm kernel, the shells of palm nut. And we import activated carbon from Sri Lanka, from Indonesia, and from other countries. Why couldn't we produce that? Why is it not possible for us to do it and supply that here? Do you know how much we spend in importing the activated carbon? Until recently, the grinding meat is something called grinding media. They are
Balls.
they are steel balls. We used to call that bone race when we were kids.
Ah, okay.
Yes, but they're bigger size, smaller size, and all that. These are made out of scrap that we used to import. So why would we just export the scrap and then buy these grinding media from abroad when we could produce that over here? So you provide the incentives, you create the opportunities for daring entrepreneurs.
Are you
Well,
creating? Or do you think
for
that
us,
state regulation and policy
precisely.
and investment is creating the needed?
That's what we need to look at. For us as a commission, we have this local content law that we are implementing, regulation that we are implementing, that working with the mining industry, and again, it's important working with them, because in the past people thought they must be there, the commission must be over there, and then maybe NGOs must be over there, and then so we can be at arm's length and be fighting.
It needs to be a stakeholder.
We need to come together and say that how much activated carbon would you need? How much steel balls would you need? So you have industry taking advantage and creating that opportunity over here. So I think working with them, we have agreed that there are some things that we will not allow them to buy from outside, or they buy at a higher custom charges. You see, just to motivate the production of those items here. And we are working very well with the industry.
Are you pursuing that?
Yeah, working intimately. We've been having lots of meetings, discussions, looking at various reports. And like I'm saying, it is regulated by law. And there are milestones for submission of reports and so on and so forth, which have to go to the Minerals Commission. And the Chamber is ensuring that our members actually comply, working intimately. Tony talked about activated carbon, for example. We also talked about caustic soda. And for us, the beauty is that, you see, once the country decides that, look, on the back of mining, we are going to produce these items locally, what then happens is that other users of these products in country would find use for these things, and therefore they would also not import. And therefore, all we are saying is that on the back of mining should be the base, at least for a start, to say we are going to start production. But naturally, the market is larger.
Market.
Exactly, the critical mass for this to happen.
Because it means that the market is already
it's already there, and in fact.
And then you have the commitment.
Why
you say
not? Why
we're
not?
committed
Why not? And when we have been talking about this thing for years now. Tony and I were in Abidjan not too long ago. And Côte d'Ivoire has decided that, look, they want to diversify the economy. Generally it's been on agriculture. Now they want to expand into mining. And we spoke, at length about the Ghana's experiences in local content, the list of products which are produced locally, the challenges, the opportunities, and the lessons to be learned. I came back not long after. I received an email. Tony, I've not shared this with you, from the Burkina Faso Chamber of Mines. They want to know the list of items which they could procure from Ghana rather than sourcing from Europe. It therefore tells you that there's a huge market, huge opportunities for us. If we get our acts right, believe you me, we should be able to use mining to catalyze and get into local production.
But you agree all this is also based on what the policy projection and intentions are.
It is.
Because if the ground is not fertile, no entrepreneur rides on anything, or a group of entrepreneurs rides on anything to invest in an industry.
You are right. Yeah. And that is where the issue of manufacturing and the challenges of manufacturing come to the fore.
Tony, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, in fact, this is exactly the point, that this is not a mining business. You see, sometimes mining companies are not buying this from here. This is manufacturing business now, because they need it. So it's an opportunity for the manufacturing sector to take advantage of that. What can we manufacture and supply to you? What are the incentives? What incentives are required for us to start doing that and supplying that to us? You see, some of the items, even the activated carbon that I use, it is not only consumed by the mining industry, it's consumed by other sectors as well. So if that happens, the critical mass will be available through the mining sector, and then other sectors can take advantage of it. So I think it's important that even the manufacturing sector looks at it very carefully. It shouldn't be, the problem has been that we say mining, and therefore we think that people should mine, process, and manufacture. You see, some people are just interested in digging and getting the gold, period. But they will buy other things that you make available. So as a country, we need to listen and look at those things.
That brings me to the phrase about what has been coming up more lately, as we've had a lot more discussions on what the state of the economy is and what state do we think it should be perhaps in the next 5 and a decade. Now, I work with a company and a group that really does a lot of entrepreneurial activities, invest and etc. For every enterprise to grow, you need to have the regulation in place and the commitment of the state and the incentives, etc. The two of you and I'm sure the industry players know what really the important things are and what needs to be done. Do you think that you look at the state's own regulation, I don't want to say the executive, you look at the structures and the commitment, do you think we have them? That perhaps we can say in the next 5 years, well, that's the intention, perhaps we're going to see it, being either mooted by a ministry or an agency, etc.
For me, I think we've spoken about this for a long time. And because of our current challenges, I think the country is coming to the realization that we need to do something different. Because, our economy has done well, especially when commodity prices are doing well, cocoa, gold are doing well, we have that benefit. And so when it doesn't do well, we have the challenges we see now. So now we've seen that we need to really do something. Otherwise, we'll go through all these cycles that are unnecessary. So I am very confident. And some of us who are, we'll do our bits. We are committed to do our bits, no matter how short or long you be at a place.
So you need a holistic
commitment. But we need to commit ourselves, and we need to collaborate. This idea of people must be separate, people must not talk to others and all that, which some people tend to advocate, is probably the wrong approach. We need to sort of collaborate. The mining industry must work with the regulator, or the regulator must work with them, not in a way of giving itself up, but in a way of ensuring that we know what each other is doing. When you're hiding something, I see it. When, and when a regulation is a challenge, they can openly and honestly discuss that.
Mr. Connie, we've talked about energy and perhaps not getting the right resources locally, and so you have to go outside, increasing your cost of operations and production, etc. If we have to talk about transport, I mean, back in the day, we're always talking about rail, and I know for bauxite and manganese, the rail sector is always critical. Is it something for you feel, with the interactions you're having with the various players, either the commission that does the regulation, the state-owned or government people, you feel that the commitment is there, or is just a lip service we're paying?
That's a very, very important question you ask, because yes, you're right on point. The bulk mineral companies, manganese, bauxite, they rely heavily on transport. Unfortunately, their model, business model, actually dictates that it should be by rail. Unfortunately, that is not the case, because the rail network, the Western Rail particularly, is in a disarray, in a very, very poor state, and therefore they are compelled to haul their
by road?
By road, exactly. And this is about 50 times more expensive to do by rail rather than by road rather than by rail. And therefore, that is a major challenge we have actually been engaging government on. Almost all the advocacy programs we have, we actually raise the issue of how do we ensure that we rehabilitate the Western Rail Line so that they would have a more cost-effective means of transporting their ore to the port. Don't forget that when their costs are high, what happens is that their profit margins are also squeezed, and therefore government also is hit, because then they will not be in a position to pay the kind of corporate taxes that would all expect. So yes, government have been speaking about it. We have been engaging government, but we believe that some more action needs to be taken. We need some more firm action for this to happen. Yes,
that's a diplomat's talk. You don't want to be very critical, but it means that perhaps we have the intention, but the action and the commitment is low. And we're not saying we're not recounting words that have been said in the last 2 years. Over the last decade, we've paid lip service to
exactly.
It. The Western Rail Line, we hear it. There was even a promise sometime we'll have it up to the north.
Yeah.
And I know we have deposits in the north, mineral deposits in the north.
Yeah. And again, the beauty, the same lessons we learned about how on the back of mining, this particular, resource of the rail could be used by other sectors. It runs across, and therefore, if you get the service to the mining,
value added
so much. So if you see the mining industry, just on the
there
basis,
can be an industry
but it should be integrated.
Allied industry.
It should be integrated,
and that's what has happened in other countries.
Exactly,
Australia.
So you're saying we're joking with it?
Maybe we had been too comfortable with the revenues that probably we were getting from those areas, and our challenges hadn't come out so strongly. I mean, we used to 7 million, and now we are 25 million, and we are living in the same Ghana, the same Ghana.
The same margin.
So the challenges have gone up. So maybe now we will be, we'll be up to the task now. In the past, I think there were too much.
How critical is it for the mining industry?
It is absolutely critical. For the bulk minerals, no country transports bauxite by road. Well, if there is any, there will be a very short distance or something. It's always by rail. You cannot do iron ore business unless you are manufacturing institute, unless you are processing institute. You cannot do that by transporting the ore to the harbor by road. The road is not fit for that. So they normally do that by rail. But I know that government is desperately, because I mean, I've been at the other side and I've seen what is also happening here. I see some commitment in trying to get the railway system back. I hope that commitment actually comes to fruition. I've seen a lot of, to and fro's trying to get the rail system back because we need it. We must get it back.
It's a huge capital-intensive venture if you want to build your rail to the standard by which you could have added services. I mean, whether for commercial, for public, and even for industry.
But that's true. But then again, if you just consider the investment, exactly the benefits, and already we have a kind of catchment market for it. You have the manganese, and then you have the bauxite, and then again you have timber, and then other sectors, and then cocoa as well.
But you used to cut cocoa by rail.
So there are huge benefits. There are huge benefits, and we should not just
begging increments.
No. Even in my time, we used to. I mean, when I was born and I lived in the village, so I saw cocoa being packed, in vans for the trade to haul it. So
I know people have PhDs in mining. I mean, you can do PhD in mining, so we can't talk about all the issues in an hour, so to speak. But how is the illegal business of galamsey and small-scale miners hampering your effort to make sure perhaps if you go into a territory or a concession, you maximize what you can as much as possible?
I think this is a major problem. In the past, you would find that most illegal mining would take place on mining concessions. But in the recent past, we have all seen that it is no longer the case. In fact, in the past when they were on mining concessions and the mining companies complained, the refrain was, allow them to just make a living, just scratching the faces. This actually emboldened them, and they went on to other public lands and even water bodies and all of that, because then they were emboldened. So the extent to which they actually encroach on mining companies, concessions has actually gone there a wee bit, because they've gone on to other, public concessions and so on and so forth. But the situation is still there, because if you consider the potential benefit of illegal mining, if it is formalized to this country, is huge. And therefore, I'm happy that Tony is someone who is actually leading this crusade from the government side, and then the chamber is also adding its voice to ensure that we try as much as possible to formalize them. Sometimes when we share the statistics, people are actually surprised, because if you consider revenue, the proportion of revenue coming from that segment of the business, about 34% of gold revenue, which is huge.
34%.
About 34%, about a third of that. So it's huge, and it behooves us as a country to ensure that we formalize it and make sure they do it and do it well. Because it's not just the revenue, there are health implications, safety implications, environmental implications as well. We've seen all the pollution of the water bodies and so on and so forth. So it's a segment of the business which we need to actually grab and give focus to ensure that.
My next question should have gone to you, because you would have answered it better, because you're more like a stakeholder who is more interested because you have to protect your side. But we've seen all the effects and all the things that the small-scale mining industry has in trying to do in trying to formalize it or regulate it. How can you do it in such a way that the interest groups there are, because I know that there are investors who invest in some level of machinery and even invest in the people who are there, etc., to do all that.
Yes,
because they then too will be opposing whatever moves that will be undertaken. I mean, just on a very literal saying.
On the outset, let me say that doing small-scale mining is legal. If you're going to do small-scale mining, you can actually go and get a piece of land and do small-scale mining.
No, we have legalized it.
Yes. Without being, questioned at all. But they are defiant people also.
And there are many
people, yes, who do not want to follow the laws. Now, again, and as Sue said, initially we looked at small-scale mining as poverty-fighting activity. It is no longer a poverty-fighting activity. It's no longer an activity for the poor. It is worth creating activity. People invest. Those who are into small-scale and even galamsey, they are not the poor people. They are the rich people who, invest in that area and then stay in Accra or stay in Kumasi, stay in Takoradi, and for the poor people to suffer in a way. So what we are doing now, first, we're making it easier for people to register and get their concession. Second, I have seen that now some of the mining companies are actually giving out lands. There used to be the case that, they should shed off land, Some of the mining companies, a lot of them are shedding off lands and the commission has even demarcated areas where investigations, where exploration is being done or has been done and be parceled out for people to go and do it. Now, what we all need to do, and I'm glad the nation is doing that, is for us to see it as a national problem and not the problem of the commission or the problem of one person. Because if somebody goes into a piece of, let's say a piece of land in the bush, the commission is not there. It hasn't seen because the person hasn't come to register with us. We will not see it. But the people close to the community will see it. The district assembly there will see it. The other people, the chiefs, will see it. So they should report. Much as in the olden days, if somebody went and farmed on your lands without permission, you would take him to the chief or even to some higher level and you will not report to the lands commission. We all have to be involved and address that. I'm glad we are doing it because the effect has been devastating. You see the water bodies, you see it. You see the lands, and you see people dying because they are going to eke out a living. So I think the whole nation now feels that galamsey is not the right thing. People must come out to support the effort to ensure that they do that legally.
Okay, your last comments. Great outlook for the industry, for you?
It's difficult to say.
It's not good.
It's difficult to say. You can't say great outlook. The mining industry is dominated by gold, and the price of gold on the international market is not too certain. It's kind of flat. The good thing, though, is that the production end of it seems to be doing pretty well. On the horizon, we see a few companies, particularly one company which is about to start production sometime in a year or two. So in terms of production, there would be an upward trend, albeit not too steep. So a combination of the
and if it's a production, you mean companies coming in to mine?
Yeah, I'm talking about current production.
Or add value?
No, to mine. So if you look at a combination of the production and then the revenue, certainly the price, then certainly the revenue would not be too bad, which certainly would inure to the benefit of both the companies and the country, because, for example, royalty and corporate taxes are actually based upon the revenues that you make. The good thing, though, is that the mining companies are trying so hard. We've seen the numbers in the last few months, and they're doing so well regarding cost containment, because naturally, if the price dips, business cannot be as usual, and therefore you have to try and manage your costs.
Yeah, I mentioned that the challenge to me is costs. The price, we've seen lower price than that. So the cost is really the challenge, and I'm glad the companies are now managing the costs very well. Now, royalties are based on price. we don't even look at the cost. If the price is high, government gets more royalty. So it is in the interest that government that the price goes high. But of course, the margin also determines the profit. So I think the outlook looks, I wouldn't say great in the short run, because we cannot see far, you know. But I think the future looks bright anyway.
Okay, not great, bright. And well, if we have to be, so to speak, mining gold, and the best finishers of gold are based in Saudi Arabia, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, etc., then it means that we need to do something. And we'll take holidays, go to Dubai, go and buy gold that perhaps we can find here and come and put on as great ornaments and even as great investments. Well, so it's been our discussion on the mining sector, and it's been great having two great personalities representing not only the companies but also Chief Executive of the Ghana Chamber of Mines and SULEMAN Kone. I got his name right this time. And thanks for joining me, sir.
Oh,
okay, it's been a pleasure. And Dr. Tony Obing, he's been around for a while. On the other side now, on the side of the state as well. So he is the Chief Executive of Ghana's Minerals Commission. And we say again, thank you for passing through, Tony. We hope to have you again sometime. And your contributions have been very instrumental. We're taking a break, and today we've been telling you it is the International Youth Day. It's being marked not only in Ghana but across the rest of the continent and the rest of the world. And the theme is youth and mental health, and it's also under the local slogan, Mental Health Matters. Now, we'll be having in the studio the Chief Executive of the National Youth Authority, and Ras Mubarak will be in the studio to talk to us on what the intentions are, what is being done to improve the lot of the youth. And again, you know, today the President, John Dramani Mahama, is launching the National Youth Fund, and that endowment fund will help. We're told with a seed capital of $10 million or 10 million Ghana cedis, help young entrepreneurs in Ghana see through their business plans and even cushion them when they have difficulties in their current businesses. Do stay on. We'll be right back.